Y'all probably should mute yourselves.
Turn it on.
Well, it doesn't want to go to the beginning, so I will make it go to the beginning. Sorry. Okay, we're ready. And here's Eric. Should I wait a second or, well,
Probably go ahead.
okay. We're going to be talking about Cairo Geniza today, or in the digital age. At the end of 1997 or during 1997, a lot of meetings were held to look at what was going on now that we've had a whole 100 years of studying Geniza, right? And there were a lot of problems because, as I said, the Geniza was actually anti-iCarval. It was just a jumbled mess of material, and that jumbled mess of material had been dispersed all over the world. So we had problems that not everything was preserved, documents were degrading, fragments were scattered all over the world. There wasn't a comprehensive catalog. Many of the fragments were stained and difficult to read. The collections changed hands. Some fragments were studied many times and others not at all. So like if there was a biblical fragment that, or let's say something from Maimonides that somebody published early on, other scholars might go back to that over and over again. That was accessible, but many of the others weren't. So the research was disorganized. There were at least 120,000 books and articles. And it was hard for a scholar to know what fragment had actually been studied and what hadn't been. So at Cambridge, if we start there, where there was, let me change this view, where there was a massive amount of material, there was very little progress made between 1909 until Goiten in the 1950s. In 1956, they started a microfilm project, and fragments that hadn't been conserved were conserved and filmed, but some of the film was barely legible. Goiten's work led to an increased interest in the fragments, so it created a lot of stress on the library collections and the librarians. And part of that issue was that there was actually no specialist assigned to just that collection. Yes, Sue?
Was it not, the film was not legible and that was the problem because of the quality of the film, or was it because of the fragments themselves?
Yes. Yes.
Both.
And you know, I mean, microfilm is intrinsically difficult to look at anyway. You know, a researcher who has to look at microfilm all day is going to have very irritated eyes. Yeah, but okay, so basically they had no one person that was responsible just for the Geniza. It was basically, they had a guy named E.J. Thomas, who was the librarian. He was an Orientalist. His responsibility was everything between Casablanca and Yokohama.
Okay.
And his actual research interest was Buddhism. And so any interest in cataloging Hebrew documents were the collections that were acquired in the 4 centuries before Schechter's trip to Cairo. And there were some Geniza pieces from that they had purchased before they realized that the Geniza was a treasure. So very little was done with the Taylor Schechter collection. And a lot of the collection was in crates. So you had all these visiting scholars and they had to find what they needed and direct where they should be put. So that was a big problem. So finally, at the end of 1960, the Faculty Board of Oriental Studies recommended that an underlibrarian be appointed with responsibility just for the Geniza project's collection. And they funded it by suppressing a lectureship that they were going to have. And they gave in 1964, Dr. Henry Knopf, the Geniza collection. He was already working at the library. And basically they gave him 5 years. But since that worked, in 1970, he was appointed to the retirement age with the requirement that he also teach rabbinics. And he left there in 1972 to work at Bar Ilan. And while he was there, they did make some progress. He started cataloging biblical fragments. He added the boxes from the new series, and he made progress on microfilming. The new series were things that Goiten told him not to throw out. Some progress was made on conservation of that new series, but no additional staff was added. So the estimate was that it would take 50 more years to finish that conservation. That was in 72. So then in 1973, they hired Stephen Reif, who was a Scottish Jew, and he did something unheard of for the scholarship up until then, in that he did fundraising, to philanthropists and organizations and even interested individuals, and he raised £1 million. And with that, he was able to hire staff, and he finished all the conservation and microfilming of the new series by 1981. The remaining 32 crates were sorted in 1974 and 75 into an additional series. There are 45,000 fragments cataloged and 50,000 published references were found. An effort to publicize the research included publication of a newsletter called Geniza Fragments, which I can't show you. Basically, Cambridge University Press joined with the library to establish and publish a Geniza series, and he retired in 2006, and the Geniza Research Unit is now run by Ben Outwife. And on the Geniza Fragments, it's part of the Cambridge University Digital Library. They have a blog, and every week, I think they publish 1 or 2 documents or fragments from their collection with a discussion about it. It's really interesting. I guess he realized that if you have interest in the collection, you might be able to get more money. This is Stephen Reif, and basically under his directorship, the Cambridge Geniza collection was transformed from an overlooked, underused, and only partially available research to a major literary treasure that's now widely exploited by scholars and has revolutionized the understanding of medieval life. And he was a scholar in his own right. In 2020, for the Queen's birthday honors, he was appointed Officer of the Order of the British Empire, and for services to scholarship. He's contributed himself to international developments in the study of Jewish liturgy, especially clarifying the evolution of Jewish prayer texts in the Eastern Mediterranean Crusader times. And a volume of his essays was published by his colleagues, was published in 2010, that was entitled Sacred Source, a Sacred Source, which also contains some of his reminiscence. And in 2019, his colleagues also published works in the field of Jewish liturgy in his honor that they called On Wings of Prayer, with an updated list of his publications. And his autobiography is entitled Bouncing Back and Forward, and it was published in January 2021. I haven't gotten that one yet. This, I think, is worthwhile. It takes a little bit of time, but it's really an example of how the collections were actually cleaned up. I mean, it's pretty amazing. Until I saw this, I had no idea of just how bad these fragments looked. And this is from Cambridge.
Among the treasures of Cambridge University Library are the Geniza collections. More than 200,000 fragments of medieval manuscripts retrieved from the storage room, the Geniza, of the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Fustat, Old Cairo, and its surroundings. The Cambridge Geniza collections consist of the Taylor Schechter collection, the Louis Gibson collection, shared with the Boyle Libraries at Oxford, and the Mosseri collection. Consisting of 7,000 fragments, this collection was assembled by Jacques Mosseri, a successful businessman from Cairo. In 2006, the Mosseri collection was entrusted to Cambridge University Library on a 20-year loan. During its stay in Cambridge, this collection will be conserved and digitized and thoroughly catalogued. But how do we get from the unconserved stage to this easily consultable book?
The Conservation Department at the University Library has been conserving Geniza fragments since the 1970s. Many of us currently working in the department began our careers as book and paper conservators working on this material. Our main objectives are to reveal and preserve the text, stabilize the fragments, improve housing in order to reduce handling and facilitate digitization and access.
When the Mosseri collection arrived at the University Library in 2006, our colleagues carried out a survey which recorded the condition of every single fragment in the collection. The survey revealed the fragility of the fragments and highlighted.
Are you seeing this?
Typically, the fragments.
Sorry. Everybody was quiet. Yes, I am sharing it. Oh, I know, maybe.
No, Sarah, I understand this because I made the same mistake. You have to go to share screen and then select a different document. When you share a screen, you'll be able to see all of the stuff.
Very dirty, and there are
Okay,
stains, holes
let
and
me shut
tears,
this.
insect and moisture damage, and in some cases,
Ah.
almost the
You know, the last time I did it, it worked, sorry.
Okay,
Do I say new share?
go to your share screen.
Oh, the screen I'm sharing.
Yeah, so you're sharing the slide at the moment. So you're sharing PowerPoint. See if you can go to Safari or whatever else wherever you're seeing the video and share that.
Okay. Sorry about that, guys.
I made the same mistake when I was.
So it's a new share?
Yeah, just go to share screen and then
There.
pick
Oh,
something
I
else.
see.
It happens to everybody when they do this.
Well, it didn't happen last time, which is
Well,
weird.
It
because I've
had
done
to
it
happen
before.
last time unless you got a special edition of Zoom.
The last time I did, nobody told me that. Okay. Let me see if I can do that.
Yeah, it should be doable. Probably nobody told you is what happened.
No, because I showed one before just like this. Nobody said anything. Stop share. I'll do that.
All right,
And
now share screen.
now I'll share screen. And here we go. And share sound.
you're going to share directly from your, yeah, there it is.
Sorry.
Among the treasures of Cambridge University Library are the Genisa collections, more than 200,000 fragments of medieval manuscripts retrieved from the storage room, the Genisa, of the Ben Ezra Synagogue in Fustat, Old Cairo, and its surroundings. The Cambridge Genisa collections consist of the Taylor-Shackler collection, the Louis Gibson collection, shared with the Bodleian Libraries at Oxford, and the Mosseri collection. Consisting of 7,000 fragments, this collection was assembled by Jacques Mosseri, a successful businessman from Cairo. In 2006, the Mosseri collection was entrusted to Cambridge University Library on a 20-year loan. During its stay in Cambridge, this collection will be conserved and digitized and thoroughly catalogued. But how do we get from the unconserved stage to this easily consultable book?
The Conservation Department at the University Library has been conserving Genisa fragments since the 1970s. Many of us currently working in the department began our careers as book and paper conservators working on this material. Our main objectives are to reveal and preserve the text, stabilise the fragments, improve housing in order to reduce direct handling and facilitate digitisation and access.
When the Mosseri collection arrived at the University Library in 2006, our colleagues carried out a survey which recorded the condition of every single fragment in the collection. The survey revealed the fragility of the fragments and highlighted common problem areas. Typically, the fragments are very dirty and there are stains, holes and tears, insect and moisture damage, and in some cases, almost the complete disintegration of the substrate and the inks. Working on a large-scale collection like this, the challenge for conservators is to find a conservation treatment that not only fulfills the objectives, but also that can be easily applied and adapted to every single item. Before any conservation can take place, we need help from a field expert who can read Judeo-Arabic, Arabic and Hebrew. They identify the recto and the verso, that's the front and the back of each of the fragments.
This is a known work. This is a commentary on the Babylonian Talmud from the tractate Drachim. We can see that probably these two smaller pieces may fit in the empty spaces here. And actually, thanks to conservation, they may be reunited and joined together. Once I've recognized the recto, I drew the outline of the fragment so that the conservators will then know which way is up and which way is down, what is the front and what is the back. And then I write the class mark.
When a batch of fragments arrive in conservation, the first thing is to prepare a documentation spreadsheet. This tick box form helps us keep track of our progress and record what treatments have been applied to each fragment. We also photograph the recto and verso of every fragment before any conservation treatment is carried out. Some of the inks on Geniza material can be extremely powdery and flaky, and in some cases the inks have almost disappeared, so all are assessed before any treatment is carried out. The inks are tested under magnification using a linen tester and a fine sable brush. We gently brush the surface of the ink and then assign them a level 1, 2 or 3 depending on their friability or how likely they are to become dislodged or detached. Those assigned a level 3 are at extreme risk of loss and are put aside to await ink consolidation at a later date. A lot of Mazzari fragments have dirt obscuring the text. The dirt is removed using a soft sable brush. Overall, we try to avoid brushing directly over the inks. However, for the fragments with stable inks, such as this one, gentle brushing is okay. As you can see, this is an essential part of the process. There is a lot of dirt and dust to dislodge. Where we feel we need to work in finer detail, we use a microscope to assist us, so we can be more precise with our cleaning.
Next, we need to unfold the fragment to reveal any hidden text in the creases and folds. We apply a small amount of deionized water along the edge of the crease, and this helps relax the paper fibres so that it opens more easily. In general, we always try to minimize the introduction of moisture, as excessive moisture can have a deteriorative effect on the fragments, particularly the inks. Now the unfolding is complete. The fragment is placed between blotter and silicone release and underneath a lightweight in order to acclimatise to its new shape. When it comes to repairing the fragments, we are not trying to restore them to complete documents, but rather stabilise them as they are. There are two options for repairing them. We can use wheat starch paste and, when further support is required, a remoistenable tissue. Wheat starch paste is a starch-based adhesive with excellent archival properties. Again, we use only a tiny amount in order to minimise the moisture that we introduce. Remoistenable tissue is a tissue paper pre-coated with a thin adhesive layer. We make this in-house using Berlin tissue, which is an extremely lightweight but strong and fibrous paper. Not only can the adhesive layer be reactivated with minimal moisture, but the lightweight Berlin tissue also places very little strain on repaired fragments and is barely visible once dry.
Once dry, the fragments are ultrasonically encapsulated between inert, archivally sound polyester sheets. The brand name for this material is Melanex. The library has been encapsulating Geniza fragments in Melanex for decades, as it provides significant support for the fragments. We use spot welds around the perimeter of the fragment to gently hold it in position. We do a strip weld around the edge of the Melanex. We leave an air hole of a few centimetres to allow airflow to the fragment. The fragment is now ready to be digitised.
Once the fragments have been digitized, they are bound into bespoke bindings designed in-house. The final result is a very handy and easy to consult book that makes the work of the researcher very comfortable while preserving the manuscripts from degradation and damage.
Anyhow, I thought that this was worthwhile because until I saw this, I had no idea of what the documents actually looked like to begin with. Okay, stop share and share screen. You know, no idea of how bad they looked and what went into fixing them up. It's pretty amazing. So things were going along a little bit better, and this man got involved, which really changed things greatly. This is Albert Dove Friedberg, who was born in Lyon in 1946 to an Orthodox family. He moved as a young child to Montevideo, Uruguay, and he stayed there until after his bar mitzvah. And then he attended yeshiva in Baltimore, and he got a bachelor's at Johns Hopkins and an MBA at Columbia, and he entered the world of finance, creating the Friedberg Mercantile Group, which was a brokerage and hedge fund in Toronto. And he's involved in different boards now. But even though he was involved in the modern world of finance, he also continued to study Maimonides and other medieval work. And in 1997, which was the centenary, he attended the American Association of Jewish Research Gathering in Boston to celebrate that centenary and the close discovery of the Geniza. And this was one of the addresses that he heard that really excited him. Sue, can you read it?
Yes. As, as part of the celebration of the centennial of the discovery of the Geniza, together with the accounting of the bounty the Geniza has bestowed upon us, we must note the frustrations that still make the Geniza research difficult and thus the domain of relatively few scholars. Despite complete access to most collections, made greatly easier with the arrival of microfilming after World War II, now including materials previously hidden behind the Iron Curtain, the delays in cataloging Geniza collections continue to hinder scholars. To a large degree, the clarion call of M. Zulay in 1949 for an international effort to classify and publish Geniza material in all areas fell upon deaf ears. See M. Zulay, Ben Geniza, Le Geniza, Luach Haaretz. Only in the very recent past have catalogs of major collections been appearing. Parts of the Taylor Schechter collection, the Mosseri collection, and now of rabbinic material in the ENA collection. It is my hope that these efforts will continue until all material in all collections properly cataloged and the material therein made accessible to scholars.
So you can see it was really a problem for the scholars to try to do any research. They'd have to travel all over the world and or look at whatever existed in microfilm. And so Friedberg decided to create the Friedberg Geniza Project, and it's the FGP, and the initiative was to create and assemble a unified digital database of the Cairo Geniza manuscripts, and Friedberg would provide the funding, universities and libraries would provide the support, scholars would provide direction. You know, after all, digital tools were now available that previous generations didn't have. This was, remind you, 1997. And in 1999, here was the very first meeting of the initial FGP board, and you have Neil Danzig, Yaakov Elman, from left to right, Albert Friedberg, Menachem Ben Sasson, Menachem Kahana, Stephen Reif, Haggai Ben Shammai, Lawrence Schiffman, Mordecai Friedman, and Rabbi Reuven Rubelo. And here is Rife's description of the first meeting. We might as well use his words. He was there, I wasn't. Peter, can you read that? I know it's small, but
Let me give it a shot.
okay.
A patron of Jewish scholarship in North America, 3 New York professors of Jewish studies, and an international group of Geniza specialists have been responsible for an exciting new research initiative. Mr. Albert D. Friedberg of Toronto and Buckingham Foundation have set up the Friedberg Geniza Project in the Skirball Department of Hebrew and Judaic Studies at New York University and are planning to fund numerous Geniza projects around the world. The intention is to encourage the completion of existing programs of research and to make results available on computer for experts and non-specialists alike. Text, descriptions, translations, and digitized images of the Geniza fragments are among the items that are planned to make their appearance in both databases and printed format. Grants will be made for Geniza projects at academic institutions, and among the areas to be covered are biblical and rabbinic literature, Jewish prayer, and philosophy and legal documents. The Friedberg Project is being managed at New York University by Professor Lawrence H. Schiffman of NYU, Professor Neil Danzig of the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, and Professor Yaakov Elman of Yeshiva University. Sitting on the academic advisory board are Professors Menachem ben Sasson, Haggai ben Shammai, and Menachem Kahana of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, Professor Mordecai A. Friedman of Tel Aviv University, and myself. Agreements to fund and further specific projects have already been made with the Ben Zvi Institute in Jerusalem, the Talmud Department of Hebrew University, the Jewish Theological Seminary of America, the Department of Near Eastern Studies at Princeton University, and our own Geniza Research Unit in Cambridge. At the unit, assistance from the Friedberg Project will enable us to engage Mr. Ben Outhwaite shortly to complete his doctoral dissertation on the final preparation and publication of the biblical fragments in our Geniza collections. At the same time, Dr. Avihai Shaftil and Dr. Frederick Neeson will continue their work on the Arabic and Judeo-Arabic items, and Dr. Erica Hunter and Ms. Rebecca Jefferson will be occupied with the research necessary for the second volume of published material from the Cambridge Geniza collection. We also have the cooperative projects from Professor Mark Cohn in Princeton on the documentary fragments and Dr. Uri Ehrlich of Ben-Gurion University in Beersheba on the liturgical items. Altogether, Geniza research seems to be fast acquiring a welcome and promising international flavor.
Yeah, well, I thought his words might be better. So at that point, Reif suggested that they digitize all of the documents, which sounds awesome. But at that point in 1999, it would have cost $24 million, which was more than Friedberg had planned to spend. And they decided instead to focus on systematically identifying and cataloging the fragments. Some of the collections had been cataloged, but many of them had not. And some of the initial paper catalogs had disappeared, like the Musari collection had been cataloged at one point, but nobody knew where that was. Some of the documents were very small fragments that they still had to identify in order to be able to catalog them. And so their initial work was to find the documents, identify the documents, transcribe them, and translate them. And the work started pretty slowly. In 2002, Lawrence Schiffman from NYU was replaced by James Diamond. Scholars were drafted in many fields. A senior scholar was assigned to every team with documents assigned, and he could assign new people to his teams. And they would then try to identify what they had, but barely a dent was made after 5 years. But there was a bonus to that. By 2004, digital technology had improved, and you could get better images of documents of all sizes, much less risk of document damage during the scanning, and the price was much less. So at that point, it would be only a few $100,000 rather than tens of millions of dollars. So they could digitize everything, and that was more in line with what they were willing to spend. But you needed a computer scientist to start this project off, and that person needed to be able to design efficient protocols, new software, algorithms. He also had to encourage and coordinate cooperation of libraries, scholars, and technicians from all over the world. He had to be experienced and a creative computer scientist who also knew Jewish sacred literature and Hebrew and Arabic with an appreciation of the value of the Geniza and, of course, strong people skills. And oddly enough, they were able to find such a person. And this is Yaakov Shweka, born in 1936. He just died in 2020. His father was a leading rabbi of Cairo, and his great-grandfather was the chief rabbi of Aleppo. He moved to Israel at age 20 and earned master's degrees in 1957 and a PhD in mathematics in 1971 from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He was on the faculty at Bar Ilan University and became full professor in 1990. And he was acclaimed for his large approaches to handling large volumes of data. And he directed the Bar Ilan Responsa project, which was a massive database of rabbinic responsa going back to ancient times. And he earned the Israel Prize for that in 2007. In 2005, he was hired as a chief computerization scientist for the FGP, for the company Genizim, which was the computerization wing of FGP. They opened offices in Jerusalem and they had 15 programmers and consultants hired. And the first task was to identify all the collections in the world, which they started out, they knew of 56 collections and 23 smaller ones, but it was actually a very difficult task. As I said, collections were sold, they changed hands, and some of the treasures were not yet discovered. And so there were his goals from the beginning. Yeah, early on, Geniza studies, people would only look at biblical and literary documents, and they wouldn't pay attention to little pieces. And so that's why some of the pieces were studied a lot and others weren't. So the project's aim was to look at all of the pieces, and regardless of their size, because you couldn't say what might be considered important in the future. You know, as I said, most of the stuff Goyton looked at was about to be thrown out. And their goals were to allow access to all people, both scholars and lay people. The Genizim was to be independent of the universities and libraries. And so scholars from those organizations were advisors, but Genizim was separate. And it's just the computerization group. They don't annotate, translate, catalog, or otherwise add to the data. All the data will have its source documented. Genizim doesn't arbitrate between scholarly disputes. So one author can correct notes of somebody else and other scholars can add supplementary notes, but the Genizim doesn't take sides, it just publishes it all. And the system will organize the fragments according to the owner's shelf marks. The shelf marks are the numbers that are assigned to a box that the fragments in or the book that the fragments in. And there isn't really standardization between the organizations. They each have their own standards. So, but the first task was to track down and identify all existing holders of the documents and all the shelf marks. And having it that way also would encourage the researchers to be more accurate when they're using the numbers in a publication, because you might have somebody just publish like TS-2, but you didn't know which document they were referring to in that volume. So by having this standardized in one source would allow for much more accurate citation. Okay, he had set protocols. The effort started in 2006. And at first it was very difficult to get the libraries to open up their collections. And it was difficult to find photographers and equipment that could do the complex job of computer and manuscript imaging, which was again scattered all over the world. JTS was one of the first organizations with collections to agree in 2006. Cambridge was soon after, but the arrangement took over a year since the collection was so massive. FGP did the digitization free of charge. In some places, the owner organization did it themselves under cooperation and funding with the Genizim. Anything missing from its place was also documented. So if an image isn't, a fragment isn't in its envelope that it's supposed to be in, the picture of the envelope was taken with a mark saying missing. And so the standards included high resolution of 600 DPI, 400 was standard at that time. And that was big enough to really get good detail, but at the same time, not be too big a document to be able to handle it. And they standardized the layout and the lighting, it was full color photographs of both sides, even if the side's blank. And the background was a very standard specific royal blue. Apparently, some places they were calling it Shueika blue. And basically, by having the standards, you could distinguish between the document and the background. So a user could change the background to suit whatever they needed to be able to see things better and within a pixel. Because I don't know if any of you guys have ever tried to edit an image. It's really a pain to try to make sure you get the edge and not get into the document. And they also insisted that no artifacts would show. So if there were clips or weights, etc., they would be covered with that standard blue color. And it would allow a ruler image without covering any of the fragments. And these are the things they collected, with the shelf marks, the images, bibliographic materials, which detailed references to any publications that cite the fragments. Cambridge already had that information, and the people in the project worked on collecting Hebrew citations prior to 2004. And then after that, they started in other languages. There's catalog data, which were codes of all data related to the fragment, which might include the physical dimensions of the fragment, the condition, what the domain being, is it biblical, Talmudic commentary, documentary, medicine, magic, or so forth. The title, the author, the scribe, the script, the language, etc. And there are 70 fields that they included. There were scans of any existing catalogs that relate to that fragment. And there were 70,000 of those in 2012, which were basically a clear image of what the fragment had been included in catalogs. There were transcriptions and translations where they exist, mainly in Hebrew, and now some are in English, and joins, and a Wikipedia-like module to allow accredited users to add any relevant data. A join is when two fragments join to make part of one document. The features included, you could search by specific shelf mark. So every collection had its own shelf mark structure, like I said, or you could do a query to get a whole list of shelf marks. There was a quick view, so you could see all the documents that were pulled up in your query in a lower image quality. Any full text for transcriptions and translations. You can have a dedicated workspace for every user. There's a forum to discuss the shelf mark, and you can also restrict it to just your internal groups. If you're doing research with your own team, you could have a discussion on that using their site. You could append notes to display to all other users. Any accredited users can add information, which is then integrated the next day. And they have a jigsaw function to test a join, where you could select fragments that were numbered and move them on the screen. And somebody with a big monitor can display up to 4 images at one time to look at the document, catalog images, transcription, et cetera, all at once. And this was a whole lot easier for a researcher than A, traveling, and B, having to look at microfilm all day. And so the things that are the benefits from a computer is you can actually look at the text outside the background of the image. Fragments can be accurately assign the inner and outer dimensions, the number of lines, the average line width and length, text density, the size of the margins, etc., without human interaction. So scholars were saved time, and this would be more accurate and also obviously more efficient for the physical attributes. It would suggest joins, and the computer has different protocols to suggest joins across the world. So you might have a document in Cambridge, and a document in New York, and a document at Oxford that all form fragments that all form one document. And the computer can actually suggest the joins, and it does that using several different protocols. And it's mostly analyzing the scribe and the density of the script, not the size of the fragment, because the edges of the fragment could be degraded. So it's not as simple as finding matching edges. And sometimes it's not really a real join, and it's not that useful to scholars, but I've heard Marina Rustow giving a talk, and she said that even in those cases, it may pull up fragments and documents that are related to what you're studying. So it's still quite useful. Additional computer benefits, they had a vision. And their vision still is to compare every fragment each against another, to assign numbers and find joins for the tinier fragments. I guess that's still to be done. We can look at the FTP website if you'd like. I guess I should stop share and do a new share. If I can get back there. Boy, that's really clunky of them. If I can find, okay, here we are. Sorry, it's like share screen. And
Sarah,
yes.
I have a question.
Yes.
I mean, the documents that were in the Geniza go from, you know, Maimonides text, you know, religious text, to basically shopping.
Right. And school books too.
Yeah,
and
and school books. How
Magic.
did they prioritize it?
I don't think in this project they did, because at that point you had lots of teams of scholars working on theirs, and Shueika designed a procedure with the standards so they could actually scan a lot in one day. So yeah, and at this point it's generally all processed. I think I heard them say that it was all scanned. And you know, it was really kind of interesting because some of the documents, like there's one document that just belongs in one person's hands, some rabbi in California. So they had to find all of them, which was a trick in itself. Anybody can create a login to the Friedberg Jewish Manuscript Society. And this is obviously they have different collections at this point. And if you look at the Cairo Geniza, and I'm not an expert in using the site, I've just dinked with it. You can choose your library. So if you're looking at Cambridge, and you could look at the Taylor Schechter collection and other collections that they have, this new series and the other, I guess Oriental must be things that existed beforehand. And you can pick out a volume and it'll show you all the documents in that volume. Or you can actually do a search, and you could look at a domain. Where did I do that? It's, yeah, like I said, yeah, here you can look at the cataloging data, the Hebrew translation, English translations. There was one place where I could look for a domain, and is that it? Okay. Okay. Oh, right here, though. Select a domain. And let's say I wanted to look at Bible texts. Come on, I selected you. Oh no, apocryphal text literature, because I know I've looked at that. And then it brings up another menu and the title, and I could choose Ben Sirah, which I know is well studied, and it brings up all the places that the Ben Sirah documents are found. There are 4 pages of them. So you have the Taylor Schechter at Cambridge, and you have a variety of others, the Bodleian and so forth. That's, yeah, and so forth. So like if you, and then you could pick one of these up, let's say that one, and look at the image. Yeah, and obviously you could create a transcription if there isn't one. Move you guys off. There's a quick view, any identifications where it's shown, you know, any information about it. Catalog records. Catalog scans. And that's one that was written by Werman a long time ago. Transcriptions that they exist, which I don't, yep, this one exists, where it's been transcribed into Hebrew. And a bibliography, any place where it's shown up. And I picked the Ben Sirach because obviously that's one that's mostly studied. Are you asking a question, Suzanne? You're muted. Well, I can't hear you. Anyhow, so that's just sort of.
I'm troubled by the fact that they're allowing anybody who wants to through a Wikipedia-like
They're
project.
not. You have
They're
to be
not good.
they're-
Okay.
No, you have to be an accredited user to add.
Because it
And
kind of mentioned that they had that capability, and it kind of hit me as I don't like that. But thank
Well,
you.
yeah, they're not.
I'll
You have
shut
to
up
be-
now.
Okay, good. No, teasing, teasing. Yeah, so that actually, I just wanted to show you what it looked like because it's amazing. And I don't know how to use it that well, but it's, I did use it when I wanted to find pictures of the documents because I thought that would be a lot more interesting than, here we are, than just, talking about the document. Now, Cambridge University Digital Library has quite a lot of their document accessible to all. And then and I guess Oxford does as well. The Princeton library project, the Princeton Geniza project, was actually started in 1985 by Mark Cohen and Avram Udovich, and they had a grant from IBM. And when Goyton died, all of it, because he was at Princeton, all of his research was sent to Israel according to his will, with copies first being made to remain at Princeton. And the Princeton project started then, and the goal was to create a machine readable online free text database of all historical documents in the Cairo Geniza, where all the words are keywords. And by that they meant letters, court records, marriage contracts, divorce agreements, accounts, shopping lists, anything. Basically documents from everyday life. And that's what Princeton specializes in. There aren't any literary sources that have anything like it. And Cohen saw the potential in technology to store and search for the Geniza transcriptions. But in 1985, they had to actually invent an editor to let them put in Hebrew and Aramaic characters or Arabic characters, because the digital tools were not what they are today. They had to invent their own browsers and so forth. So they've come a whole long way. Right now, Marina Rustow and Eve Krakowski are, Marina is the director and Eve is an advisor to it. And if anybody's interested, she's given a lot of YouTube talks. And the focus is just on the Geniza and just on transcriptions of everything. And they have all of Goyton's index cards there. That man was pretty amazing. And actually, by 2013, when Cohen retired, there were 4,320 transcribed documents in that corpus. And they've also instituted from the PGP a role for the lay citizen scientists in the Geniza studies. And it's called the Scribes of the Cairo Geniza on Zooniverse. And it's a phased project to sort the fragments and transcribe the fragments, and that anybody can join. And they can volunteer, and they don't really have to know, for many of those phases, they don't have to know Arabic or Hebrew. There's some lessons in it that show them what they should look for. And I can show you that website too. It's pretty cool. Stop share and share. It's called Scribes of the Cairo Geniza. And they're showing here that they have 6,269 volunteers. They've done that many classifications and this many subjects and that many completed subjects. And you can join in, you can visit the project, and you can transcribe Hebrew fragments. I think at first they were just identifying whether or not they're Hebrew or Arabic. You can transcribe Arabic script fragments, and again, and basically they're working still on finishing the easy Hebrew. And I think or maybe it's the easy Arabic, but they're going to come up with challenging soon. You can search for Hebrew phrases coming soon and Arabic phrases, or sort the fragments. And the fun part about that is they also have a forum where the lay citizen scientists, as they call them, could converse with the experts in the field on the documents. And it's a partnership between Penn Libraries, where this is originated in the Princeton Geniza Lab, the JTS, University of Cambridge, Manchester, the Bodleian Libraries, the Creative Center for Interdisciplinary Research of the Cairo Geniza at the University of Haifa, and so forth. That's the Institute of Museum and Library Sciences. So as a sum up. Let's go do this again, sorry. Okay, basically from the Geniza Lab Princeton EDU website, they summed up a new age for the study of old texts. Suzanne, would you like to read that? Can you read it?
Digital technology has facilitated another revolution in manuscript scholarship, teamwork. The generations before us kept their notes to themselves. In the PGP, dozens of researchers have pooled their metadata and transcriptions. Paleography and transcription are often a collaborative process. There are texts so difficult that they can be read to 85% accuracy or without complete confidence. Working collaboratively means that we no longer have to suffer alone in an asymptotic nightmare. Instead of criticizing other people's editions after they are published, we can more easily help each other along the way. Reading texts together allows paleographers to admit their fallibility. It is also much more fun than the solo work for which many of us were trained.
Well, so this has made a huge difference in the approach to scholarship. It's pretty amazing. And if you wanted to read more about it, this is an excellent book, The Sacred Trash by Adina Hoffman and Peter Cole. It's very readable and it's an excellent book. And there's another book by Rabbi Mark Glickman. It's not as good, but he does talk about other things. It's much more chatty. But the other thing is that they also have different Twitter feeds. So the Geniza Lab at PGP and at Cambridge, the Geniza Lab, I know at PGP because I follow them, publishes a variety of things pretty regularly about look what we found here. Their Geniza Fragments, the newsletter from Cambridge University and their blog. They're also online. The Princeton Geniza Lab is online at Facebook, Judaica DH, Judaica DH at Twitter and Medium, and the Cambridge Research Unit at Facebook as well. It has a Facebook page. And on there, they can share fragments that they found and interesting things that anybody can learn about. And apparently, I've heard scholars in some of their talks talking about how if they get stumped, they just go out to social media and they usually get the answers within an hour by somebody who knows that particular field. So it's a very collaborative research field. And I almost wish I were 20 so I could change careers, you know. I mean, it's just fascinating. So that's my sum up within an hour. And any questions?
Have they changed our understanding of Jewish theology at all? I mean, I realize that's a tough one, but if there's an important document, it might change how we look at things.
Yeah, I would guess so. It has. I mean, I'm not an expert in it, but I know that they've done a lot of research. They know a lot more about the different Palestinian versus Babylonian rights early on. They have a better insight into how cantillation and the Nikudot were created because they had different instances of, at some point they had 3 different systems in Nikudot before the Masoretes finally, everybody became happy with that one system. You know, we're Jews, right? So we've learned a whole lot more about it, and we're continuing to learn more about it. And now they're actually learning more about Arabic life and Islamic life in medieval times, as well as the life of the people, women. You know, some people just study women. There are people who study the growth of medicine. There are people who study magic documents. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff out there. It's pretty overwhelming.
Rabbi Eli Confer from Hadar is currently in the midst of a project writing a new Siddur that is going to include huge parts that were discovered in the Cairo Geniza that are going to radically change our concept of, among other things, the Amidah.
That's wonderful. That is wonderful. Yeah, because that took a long time to standardize as well. I mean, if you look at the Talmud, even they were no clue as exactly what they were going to put in it. Every sage had his own idea. So
Right.
yeah, it's and you know, I know the Palestinian communities and the Babylonian communities did things a little differently, and both documents are there. The Talmud's also given us more documentation from the Yerushalmi, because it's much earlier than the one volume that they did have, the oldest volume that they did have of the Jerusalem Talmud. So it's mind-boggling. And you know, think about it, this was brought to people, I mean, they had the documents before 1897, but it was brought to Western attention in 1897. And how many years are we after? And people are still working on it. But now the tools are so much better. You know, everything's been saved, and anybody can look at them.
How many years does it cover? The Geniza?
I think there might be some documents from 1890s, but not 890s, but I think that generally a lot of the documentation is from 1000 to 1300, but it continues after that, you know, because Jews kind of moved away from Fustat. But there are scholars now working on Ladino documents that they found there. There are scholars now working on documents from the 1800s, because, you know, people were still using that Geniza at the time they were reconstructing the synagogue, and everything was out on the lawn. So that, you know, they found a document in Yiddish, for instance. I mean, it's amazing how long these documents were there. And it's kind of sad in a way that, you know, some of it may have been lost. You know, they're basically what Schechter referred to it as Geniza schmutz, dust.
And there were fragments of the Dead Sea Scrolls also found in there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And, you know, part of the way they've done the research, I think, is to counter the way research on the Dead Sea Scrolls was done, because Dead Sea Scrolls was extremely proprietary. No other scholars except for the people who owned it could look at them. And so this is a very different approach, a much nicer approach, you think. And, you know, and Schechter himself knew that it would take more than one generation to look at it. And I think now they're on their third or fourth generations of scholars.
Wow.
You
Sarah,
know,
say again, where on Facebook, if there are new developments that
Judaica DH, and if I find it here, and I think the Geniza Research Unit.
Okay.
I'll go look for them. And Twitter, Geniza Lab has something on Twitter. Marina Rustow publishes a lot there too. She has quite a lot. There are quite a lot on the YouTube, especially since last year everybody was stuck at home. There were a lot of lectures that were taped on Zoom. So there's a lot of good stuff there. In fact, when I started this, I wondered if I had a screw loose in my head, because, you know, even though I had said 4 hours, there's an infinite amount of material. Yeah, I do have. Yes, do we know the answer to that? No, boy, this is on tape. But, you know, there's so much out there, over 100 years.
Sarah, if you'll send links to me, I will share them with everybody who's on our listserv.
Okay, thank you so much.
Listen, first of all, thank you so much for this. I mean, this has been a fantastic, amazing, and awesome presentation over, what, 4 hours?
Yeah. Good. I'm glad it was good. I worry, you know, that's the thing you always worry about. Is it going to be something new that somebody will learn something from, and so forth? Yeah.
Yes.
Sarah, you ought to do what some Zoom things do, TVs, whatever, where you have an after show that is available only like on YouTube, but there's more. But wait, there's more.
Oh dear, not me throwing a pen at my husband to try to keep the cat from jumping on me. No, sorry about that, folks. You know? Yeah, the bloopers. I wonder if I can publish this on All Smiles webpage. I don't think so. It might not help dentistry. Although I could start looking up what they did for dentistry then.